folks? Welcome to 2025. Happy New Year to all of you. And we got a new game coming from Gen Design, and they are now developing Project Robot. And I have some new thoughts and ideas that I wanted to showcase to you guys. And I want to analyze the new season greetings card that Gen Design has put up on their Twitter page. It's surprisingly a very curious image that I think it reveals a rumor that has been going around by the community that I do believe now at the very least to be true. Let's try and analyze it broadly, okay? Like, what are we seeing here? We're seeing this image of the main character and the robot, and it's kind of hard to understand what is the distance between these two characters at the moment. He seems to be running over onto this direction while the robot is basically in the same position as he is in the reveal trailer, looking at the ocean. And on this bottom part here, we kind of see that it feels like there's some sort of brush stroke here that has completely encapsulated all of this area except for this bottom part, which is a really interesting thing to do visually. What is the significance of this? My first thought seeing this like black brush covering the entire scene was that this feels like it's the black substance of Dorman. I mean, honestly, that was my first instinct. But apart from this, we can actually see from the robot that he has a hand with fingers. But if you actually go and check this trailer when the shockwave hits and try to understand exactly what the arm looks like, you can tell that this arm is not the typical sort of arm that you would see, you know, in humans, right? With a hand and fingers. I did a very quick, very broad sort of representation of what I'm seeing at the very least right now when it comes to the arm. And it feels like it's something like this, right? Where you have the bottom part is something along these lines. Looking at some of these frames, right? I'm seeing something here that resembles a wheel, like over here. My suspicion here is that this arm is potentially something along the lines of this, right? This is the best image that I could find that would represent what I'm thinking here. Potentially this body of the robot can be transformed into some sort of vehicle that can maneuver a lot faster than if it was in a human sort of anatomy. But going back to this image, my whole point with this is that this is a completely different hand at the very least. But, and that's something that I already want to transition to, this image is basically an image that I stitched up together. I raised the shadows quite a lot in order to get all of this detail from both the character, the robot, and I stitched all of this part all the way up here, and I get this image. Now, this shows us a little bit more, okay? A little bit more to say the least. And the one thing that shows us that's by far the most interesting thing is that, yeah, like if you check this image, this is a real confirmation that at the very least, the body of this entire robot is or feels completely different or very different at the very least from the body from the reveal trailer. It feels like the anatomy of the head is pretty much the same. So to me, this is pretty much a confirmation at the very least that the head of the robot can most likely attach to different bodies of robots, obviously. But my biggest question right now is, what exactly is the relationship between the robot and the boy? We do know that this boy right here is essentially fully robotic, at least when it comes to body. The one thing that people have been debating, and with good reason in social media and whatever, is what about the head? Is the head of the body a helmet? Is it not? Like, something is up with this helmet. And I think the dead giveaway that there's something going on is that in the beginning of the trailer, we hear a heavy breathing coming from this character, which is an indication at the very least that, you know, he's breathing. He has lungs, all right, and a nose, right? At the very least. And so I'm actually drawing a lot of similarities on this with RoboCop, funnily enough. If you don't know, RoboCop is a character, very famous character from the 90s. If you don't know the story of RoboCop, and to keep it simple, the story of the main character who suffered a massive accident, and the US government basically does an experiment on him and basically tries to recreate a sort of super soldier, right? Hence RoboCop shows up, and the whole gist with him is that he's a super soldier, but he's basically almost entirely robotic. The somewhat recent remake of RoboCop actually has a really interesting scene where the main character is shown by its creator what is left of his humanity. And it's basically only the lungs, the brain, and the heart. In terms of vital organs, these are the only three things that are left of his humanity. And so I'm wondering if this little dude right here is basically something along the lines of a RoboCop. One thing that some people in the community actually notice is that the left eye of this character actually glows yellow, which is exactly what happens with this robot. The left eye also glows yellow, and the right eye does not glow at all. But I also kind of noticed that, it's not only the eye that is shut down. Take a look at the jaw, right? The jaw is actually broken. You can see it here, right? The jaw is actually bent all the way down. Now, I have no idea what happened. Maybe he got into a fight with another robot or something, and he got like a knuckle sandwich right on the right side or something. That completely broke not only his jaw, but maybe this light right here. And maybe that fight affected not only the robot, but also you, the main character. If there is any sort of symbiotic relationship between these two, it is mainly a relationship that is attached somewhat to the head. Because if you take this into account, right? Okay, so if the head of the robot feels pain, maybe the character also feels pain. Does that translate to the rest of the body? I don't think it does, mostly because we see that the body gets hit quite heavily, and the main character doesn't even flinch whatsoever. I think there exists some sort of symbiotic relationship between these two characters that is most likely located in the head of both of these characters. Are their brains connected somehow? There's so many possibilities on this. Well, if you've played The Last Guardian, you know that Trico, whenever he consumes the boy actually has a vision of the past. He has a vision of the past of Trico. In a way, they have that sort of symbiotic relationship for momentarily, right? If we look at this weapon right here, from the boy, we can actually see that this weapon is a pretty big, robust sort of weapon. And so my suspicion right now is that this weapon might have something related to how the head can actually get attached to different bodies. We see in the reveal trailer that this detachment from the head of the body feels very visceral, and it feels like a last resource sort of thing, right? You wouldn't typically do this. And so attaching this head to a different robot body, like how are you going to do this, right? You need some sort of technology that allows you to do this in a way that's somewhat fast, right? Especially for gameplay reasons. So my suspicion right now is that this weapon is most likely related to that. There's also another point that I've noticed. There is no command center in this robot, at least when comparing to, for example, Monster Z or Evangelion. These animes normally have a command center, which is a place that the character can sit and press a bunch of buttons and levers in order to do commands to the robot. This is not something that is simply present here. The character goes all the way up to the top of the head of the character, and he's just there existing. He's not even doing anything, but it bears the question once again, like, what is the relationship between these two? Do they move independently? Is the robot interconnected with the main character? Can the main character basically control however he wants the robot? Does he only give commands? Does he even need to speak to the robot in order to give those types of commands? Can he just think that and the robot just does it? There's so many questions. I don't think there is an answer to that, at least right now. We just don't really have enough information. But your mind can go so many ways that it just becomes a little bit overwhelming, to be honest. Like I mentioned again, I don't think the body of this robot has anything to do with the body that is revealed in the trailer. The hands are completely different. There are these like little circuit things, whatever these are, that are not present whatsoever in the main body of the robot. Like this character doesn't even have the massive like spikes things or whatever it is on the shoulders. So I right now I believe that this mech is just completely different from the one in the reveal trailer. Okay, another thing that I noticed, the lighting is very curious because we see this very soft light here on the bottom of this, like, it's not really a mountain, it's more like a hill. I believe this is a dawn scene early in the morning. if it actually works just like the rules of our own world, right? So it can be completely different. That's something to take into account. But if it does work like our world, I do believe it's dawn scene, mostly because during dawn, there is a lot less particles in the air that are done by both nature and human interference, which means that the saturation on the overall coloration that you see here in this part is going to be way less when compared to a sunset scene that has a lot more colorations on the yellow and red side. But you know, this is just a general rule of thumb on dawn and sunset scenes when it comes to lighting. That is something that you see generally speaking. Another thing that I noticed is that there is some coloration in the sky here that is purplish. And I think the overall effect that is trying to cause to the player is a sense of danger that is coming close, which bears the question, right? During the trailer, we see this shockwave coming in with a bunch of debris of massive structures and different robots coming in. And a lot of people have been speculating that the gameplay could be something along the lines of, on one hand, you need to build a robot in order to sustain this shockwave, and then the second part is the shockwave itself. So does this mean that we're going to have to face different shockwaves? And our objective is to basically build a robot that is strong enough to sustain the damage of that shockwave? If that's the case, oh my god, that has so many implications if that is the case, because, I mean, we're going back to Shadow of the Colossus here. Of all the Colossi, Malus, which is the last Colossus of the game, is probably the most enigmatic one. It's the one that raises a lot more questions in the community. We're talking about a massive Colossi structure that is by far bigger than any of the other colossi that is grounded at the very least, that's not flying. It almost looks like he's been nailed to the ground in this massive sort of structure. So essentially he cannot walk, he's just stuck in place, and he's facing this massive arena. He can't even turn in order to see the ocean, which is something that is a massive parallel here. On one hand, in Project Robot, you see our robot facing constantly the ocean, so far at the very least. But in Shadow of the Colossus, the 16th Colossus cannot watch the ocean. It's almost like this idea that, you know, freedom is not something that is on the reach of Malus. He is bounded to stay there and face the arena and fight whoever comes next. And you know, the community of Shadow of the Colossus has always wondered, what is the story behind this guy? We know that the tribes of Emon were the ones who supposedly constructed these colossi in order to contain Dormant's essence. But this guy is different, man. He just is. If you go and check how all the colossi die, they basically leave a bunch of rubble and dirt. While this guy doesn't really leave that, he just dies. It almost feels human in a way. I don't know, man. Like, the more information I get from this game, the more parallels I'm seeing with Shadow of the Colossus. And I mean, you cannot tell me that they're not there at the very least. Come on, man. I'm not saying that this character is Malus, right? I'm not saying that. But there's something here, dude. There's some parallels, some story elements at the very least that seem relatable. Last, but honestly not least, and it's probably the most intriguing one, is the lake on the bottom. One thing is for sure, I've spoken in my last video about the relevancy of Japanese mythology and how it's represented in these games through the 3 sacred treasures of Japan. And one of those treasures is a mirror. And this mirror is actually something that is used and associated with Amaterasu, who is the sun goddess in Japanese mythology and one of the most important figures in Japan. And if you check other Japanese mythological games, you can kind of see this through and through. Like Okami, for example, whenever you actually go and save the game, you actually save in a mirror. Mirrors are a big symbolic piece in Japanese not only mythology, but just culturally. Mirrors are very important. They are a reflection of truth. And what is something that is similar to mirrors in nature? Water. Water is a material that is very reflective And it is somewhat associated also with this sense of truth. But you might be questioning, like, okay, so what is the relevancy of that on this image? I don't know, to be dead honest. But what is odd is that they made an effort to hide this ocean or this lake. Why did they put like black ink all over it? Is it a representation of shadow or darkness coming in and taking control of that truth? I really don't know. The themes of light and dark are obviously big in these games. And if you go back to, for example, The Last Guardian, we use a mirror in order to defeat the Master of the Valley, right? In Shadow of the Colossus, we use a sword that emits a light that is kind of similar to a mirror, I would say, in order to find the next Colossi, in order to defeat the enemy. I think the use of this water reflectivity is mostly right now, at least from what we have, all the information that we have, is probably mostly an aesthetic choice in order to represent light. Because there is a big resemblance of water to mirrors. They showcase to you the truth. I don't think there's like any like hidden meaning or whatever, or some really obscure thing. Right now, I'm thinking that this is mostly just an aesthetic choice in order to represent light, the truth. From the season greetings, that was mostly my overall thoughts on it, but I wanted to showcase to you some other things that I've kind of noticed on this reveal trailer. There was this great comment by Kovai the Mook in my other video where he mentioned these ley lines, these markings, whatever these are, on this image. I actually did some tweaks in Photoshop in order for us to visualize it a little bit better, but you can see that there's a bunch of markings on the ground that are very odd and they don't feel naturalistic at all. They feel like they have been made by human hand or robotic hand in this case, I guess. I actually went back to the season greetings of last year, and in this image, we can see in the top part, I actually also put it in black and white so we can see it better, but there are these symbols, whatever these are. I think there's quite a similarity in these symbols to these ones, right? I honestly think there's also a similarity to the shoulder pad here from the main character that has also this weird symbol. When I look at the symbol, it kind of resembles this second one. I don't know. I feel like at the very least, there's something here between these three images that feels somewhat similar, but it's really hard to understand what exactly this is. Another great comment that was made by Danger Noodle Choo Choo, I goddamn love your name by the way, is that he feels like Wanderer's poncho symbol feels very similar to a circuit board. And to be honest, I kind of agree with him. If you look back at circuit boards, one of the main things about circuit boards is that whenever they do an angle, whenever they change direction, they always change in a 45-degree angle or in a 90-degree angle. And there's also these endpoints that do seem very similar to these endpoints right here, right? It's almost like if we simplify this form, for example, we would get something like this, right? I do believe that this is probably based in circuit boards. I actually agree with him, but I think it's probably based on different aspects. It's probably even based on the old designs of Shadow of the Colossus and Ico's robes incorporated with circuit boards and maybe some other inspirations that he got in order to get to this result. I was actually trying to figure out more information about this pattern here, but I was manipulating the image in Photoshop and I just put it in Google Photos, right? Just to see what would Google give me. And I got one really interesting result. So I got these results that are called the Tao Te patterns. But what are the Tao Te patterns, you might be asking? So don't mind me, but I'm going to read this little text that really describes very well what Tao Te is. Tao Te are mythical creatures from Chinese mythology and a key motive in ancient Chinese bronze art, particularly from the Shang and Zhou dynasties. They are often depicted as monstrous faces with prominent eyes, horns, and fanged mouths, usually without a lower jaw. And I want to emphasize on this last point, without a lower jaw. In myth, the Tao Te symbolize greed and gluttony. Some legends describe them as creatures that consume everything, even themselves. Their imagery is frequently seen on ceremonial vessels, possibly as protective and cautionary emblem against excess and selfishness. I don't know about you guys, but this feels like a simplified story of Shadow of the Colossus. Like, it's insane. And even comparing these masks and ornaments that are representative of Taotie creatures, they seem very similar to these masks that are used in Shadow of the Colossus. All that I'm saying is that by mistake, I found probably one of the biggest inspirations for the creatures of Shadow of the Colossus, to be honest. But what's curious about this is that, like I mentioned, usually without a lower jaw. What exactly happened to this creature in order to have a broken lower jaw, right? I mean, the amount of parallels that you constantly find with Shadow of the Colossus are just insane, honestly. Honestly, there's so much to these games, man, when it comes to ideas that it ends up actually being a little bit overwhelming at times, trying to figure this thing out. Because I feel like, for example, this whole Taotie thing could be a video on its own. If you go and search about Taotie and the mythical creatures and everything about China, the amount of information that you get is insane. There's so much to it, right? There's so much rich culture from China from there. And that's just one of the many inspirations potentially of this game. I don't know, man. Fumito Ueda and the rest of the team, I want to also emphasize that it's not only Fumito Ueda doing all of this work, man. All of the team that is behind Gen Design, that is behind Team Ico, these guys are really goddamn good at what they do. But yeah, I'll stop. I'm hoping this video is a decent video when it comes to, showcasing that information and not being a bit too overwhelming. But yeah, let me know what you think about all of this. If you want to see more videos that are more focused on these sorts of inspirations or not. If you like this video, subscribe and have a good one. See ya.